America's most unique buildings aren't as old as their counterparts in the other parts of the world. Yeah, that's absolutely... that Social Network movie where one of the twin dudes breaks off the door handle and he's like, I broke off your 200-year-old door handle. I'm like, 200 years old? Please. Beginner. That said, these buildings do run the gamut, from relatively obscure historical mansions and state-of-the-art concert venues to towering laboratories and iconic structures that more resemble art than inhabitable buildings. Some of these you might have heard of, while others have likely slipped under the radar unless you live really nearby. Whatever the case, let's take a look at 5 of America's most unique buildings. Bar none, there's no more recognizable landmark in the American Midwest than the Gateway Arch. That's that really big thing, right? I'm familiar with this, even as a non-American. Towering 630 feet over the Mississippi River to the east and the Great Plains to the west, it is an iconic monument built in honor of Thomas Jefferson's vision for the country's westward expansion. Though it's a common misconception that the arch is taller than it is wide, that's not actually the case. In fact, it's nearly identical in height and width, but since it's rarely seen from straight on, it appears to be particularly tall and narrow. Clad in reflective stainless steel, the colossal arch boasts a number of distinctive factors. It's the tallest man-made monument in the Western Hemisphere, the tallest arch in the world, and not surprisingly, the tallest accessible building in Missouri. Of the architects who participated in the design competition, 2 were Finnish-American father and son, Eliel and Eero Saarinen, who submitted competing bids. That must have made for an awkward Christmas dinner. But though the son's design won out, even more awkward now, officials confused by their names mistakenly told the elder Eliel that he'd won. The family was apparently in the midst of a champagne toast celebrating his victory when notification of the error came by telegram. Well, that's not too bad. They just oh, to you, son! Long before ground was ever broken, the project's insurer predicted that more than a dozen workers would plummet to their deaths during construction, but the only fatality associated with the arch was that of Kenneth Swyers, who parachuted from an airplane to the top in 1980. Wow, that is bold. Swyers was killed shortly thereafter when his auxiliary chute malfunctioned as he base jumped to the ground more than 600 feet below. Well, I don't think we could say that anyone was killed in construction. In fact, it's quite amazing that no one was. Well done, guys. For the era, the arch was a colossal undertaking, and many engineers were convinced that it was structurally unsound. But despite the naysayers, construction did eventually begin in February of 1963, but not before more than 3 dozen of St. Louis's city blocks were demolished to make room for the project. In what one engineer described as an enforced slum-clearance program, dozens of structures and nearly 300 businesses were razed, a controversial move since many owners strenuously objected to having their property and livelihoods taken by force. Yeah, that seems like kind of a move. We're going to destroy a whole lot of businesses and people's homes in order to essentially build a useless monument. Many of the arch's component parts were assembled in Pennsylvania, nearly 800 miles away, and shipped to Missouri via train, and when they arrived, construction on each individual leg got underway. According to engineers, the 2 sections wouldn't join properly if, when they met at the top, they were off by as little as a 64th of an inch, much tighter tolerances than welders and steel hangers were used to working with. Not only that, but across the flat Missouri landscape, high winds were common, as was harsh winter weather and tornadoes during the summer. Nonetheless, in the fall of 1965, 4 years after Saarinen's death, the 2 sections did meet as planned, but there were still more challenges to overcome, like how to get visitors from the ground to the top. Due to its curved shape, standard elevators wouldn't do, so a gondola-style tram system was designed and built by a man with no formal training, and it's still in use today. Since it officially opened, the Secret Service has prohibited presidents from ascending the Gateway Arch for security reasons, but Dwight D. Eisenhower was an exception. In 1967, 2 years after it opened, former President Eisenhower, who signed the official construction order in 1954, gave a speech at the arch, after which he demanded to ride the tram to the top. All told, the arch cost $30 million to build, or more than $105 million when adjusted for inflation, and it recently reopened after a 5-year, $300 million renovation. Though it's most well known for turning out young pilots capable of taking fight to the enemy in skies the world over, the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, Colorado, is home to one of the country's most impressive architectural marvels as well. Completed in 1962, the Cadet Chapel was designed by Chicago architect Walter Netsch, a man most commonly associated with the so-called brutalist style, which, I mean, is it really a style at all? Brutalist designers are typically applied to houses of worship and other places of peace and introspection, but with the Cadet Chapel, it really does work, and it works in quite dramatic fashion. The design was especially controversial in its day, and though the fervor has since died down, its form is so groundbreaking that it's considered innovative and striking even today. The structure was designed to house a number of distinct worship areas under a single roof, the largest of which is a traditional Protestant chapel on the main floor that seats about 1,200. The nave or central area measures 64 feet by 168 feet and reaches 94 feet at its highest. Located below the Protestant chapel, the smaller synagogue seats approximately 500, and there are areas for Muslims and Buddhists too, as well as a Falcon Circle that's popular with cadets who most associate with Wiccans, pagans, and yes, even the Druids. Can't say they're not diverse. The all-inclusive chapel is 150 feet high, 280 feet long, and 84 feet wide. On the south side, the front facade features gold and aluminium doors and has a wide granite stairway leading up to an expansive landing. Characterized by its tall triangular shape, abundant concrete, and the 17 spires that rise into the blue Colorado sky, the frame is constructed from rigid, yet relatively light tubular steel. Of the 100 identical tetrahedrons that are the chapel's building blocks, each is 75 feet long, weighs 5 tons, and is clad in aluminium panels that were fabricated in Missouri and shipped to Colorado by rail and truck. Set to put apart, the spaces between the tetrahedrons are filled with 1-inch thick colored glass. Inside, many of the traditional adornments like pews, the organ, and liturgical fittings were donated by or bought with funds from private donors and organizations. However, due to financial shortfall, some of the original plans, like having a series of gutters underneath the spires, were scrapped for less expensive and more expedient options, like applying copious amounts of cork between seams to keep excess water out. That must have seemed like a good idea at the time. Decades of leaks have caused extensive damage to much of the structure. In fact, in 2019, close inspection revealed that the problem was even larger than originally thought, and the chapel was closed for renovations that ended up costing nearly $160 million. Prevention, guys. During the project, an enormous temporary canopy was built over the existing structure, after which workers removed the aluminium panels and stained glass and installed the rain gutters that should have been there in the first place. In 2004, the chapel became an official U.S. National Historic Landmark and is still widely regarded as a prime example of American modernist architecture. Determined to rid the world of polio, Jonas Salk's pioneering 1953 vaccine altered the course of modern history, but his story doesn't end there. In the mid-50s, Salk conceived of a place where scientists could work together to solve the world's most pressing science and health concerns, and his legacy lives on in the institute that now bears his name. Working with Salk, renowned Estonian-American architect Kahn produced one of the most Spartan, architecturally unique, and otherworldly complexes in the United States, a monument of teak, marble, steel, and concrete that's a beacon for scientists the world over. Situated on nearly 30 acres of coastal bluffs with unobstructed views of the Pacific Ocean in California, construction of the Salk Institute began in 1962. One of Salk's primary charges to Kahn was that the facility must be full of light and open spaces that he believed would foster collaboration and breakthroughs. To that end, Kahn made the columnless labs 65 feet wide and nearly 250 feet long, and he wrapped them in double-pane glass to admit natural light. Each lab features a number of individual study towers that offer stunning ocean courtyard and fountain views. 2 identical rectangular buildings flank the sweeping central courtyard, each of which is 6 stories tall with alternating levels of work and utility spaces. Atop most major buildings, the Institute has more than 2,000 solar panels that supply renewable energy to the campus. The River of Life water feature that runs through the central courtyard represents the constant flow of discoveries spilling into the greater knowledge embodied by the vast Pacific Ocean. First formulated by the Romans, the pozzolanic concrete Kahn used to construct most of the buildings gives them a distinctly warm pinkish hue. It's also even more resistant to water and the elements than other more modern concrete mixes, but the Institute's coastal location has been tough on many of the structures. For example, the abundant teak-paneled windows haven't held up well against wind, weather, and a mysterious fungal infection. In the summer of 2017, after a nearly $10 million multi-year effort to restore the teak windows and other architectural elements, Institute staff reported that the renovations were successful and that it'd be another 50 years before they'd need to consider switching to modern windows. Sitting proudly atop the southernmost in a chain of hills known locally as the Seven Sisters, the retirement estate of long-deceased director, actor, and playwright William Hooker Gillette is one of Connecticut's and America's most historic and interesting architectural attractions. The estate centerpiece is a 24-room mansion. Gillette was born in nearby Hartford in 1853 to a prominent Yale-educated attorney father and a mother who traced her roots to the state's founding family. There must have been something in Hartford's water back then, because young Gillette's cohorts included two childhood friends who'd go on to become titans of American literature: Samuel Clemens, later Mark Twain, and Harriet Beecher Stowe, author of Uncle Tom's Cabin. For his part, Gillette was one of the most famous actors of the day, known most notably for his portrayal of Sherlock Holmes in theatrical remakes of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's detective stories. But after a long, illustrious, and often harried career, he needed a place away from the fans and the limelight. Officially known as the Seventh Sister Estate, but commonly referred to by locals as Gillette Castle, Gillette himself apparently preferred just the pile of rocks. The retired actor handled much of the design himself, though he hired a local contractor to build it. Construction began in 1914 and ran until 1919, and when it was done, the colossal home took up more than 14,000 square feet, that's 1,300 square meters, and cost just north of $1 million, or about $15 million in today's money. Work was done primarily by a team of just 20 builders, including 5 master carpenters who hew much of the white oak appointments by hand, and masons who fit the rough-cut fieldstone, much of which was collected from the property. And contrary to other stately homes of the day, Gillette had fieldstone left unfinished, which gave the home a particularly unfinished, dramatic, and even primordial look that set it apart from its contemporaries. In another departure from construction norms, Gillette chose to have the frame supported by steel I-beams and insisted that the home have every modern convenience, including central heating and electricity provided by an on-site generator. Ever the showman and eccentric, Gillette commissioned the builders to include an art gallery, greenhouse, several towers, as well as a lockable liquor cabinet that could be viewed by a network of mirrors leading to the second-floor balcony where he spent much of his time. When William Hooker Gillette died in 1937 at the age of 83, the home was left to relatives who tried to sell it at auction. Thankfully for history buffs, the bids were insultingly low, and the state later bought the property and made it into a park that opened in 1944. Canadian-American Frank Gehry is one of the world's premier architects. Though he's most well known for designing the stunning Guggenheim in Bilbao, Spain, and the Walt Disney Concert Hall in LA, his new World Center in Miami's South Beach made quite a splash when it opened in January of 2011. Taking his signature deconstructivist style and adding more familiar and angular shapes, the building, which houses a symphony in America's Orchestral Academy, is comparatively simple and subdued, and therein lies much of its appeal. Unlike his other works, it's generally regarded as something of a compromise, a word that isn't often associated with Gehry. Situated on the 2.5-acre tract of prime Miami real estate and featuring seating for more than 750, the large white plaster and glass building looks the way it does largely because it was intended to stay well within the community's classy and contemporary Art Deco envelope, among which a busy design might have seemed hopelessly out of place. Once inside the center's naturally lit performance area, however, the jumbled, curved, and deconstructed component shapes for which Gehry is known become evident. The centrally located stage is visible from 360 degrees and is surrounded by 6 distinct spectator areas. And its acoustics are second to none thanks to the center's design and help that Gehry enlisted from world-renowned sound expert Yasuhisa Toyota, with whom it worked on the Walt Disney Concert Hall. Yet despite its abundant seating, high-tech sound system, and cavernous interior, no spectator is ever more than 13 rows away from the stage, and visitors frequently remark that it has a surprisingly intimate feel, which was, as you probably guessed, part of the plan, because, as Gehry put it, the audience is right in the music. In addition to performances, the center includes areas for symphony practice, community programs, and other events like art shows and fundraisers. Another of the center's goals was making classical music more accessible and appealing to younger audiences, which is largely done. All told, construction lasted between 2008 and 2011 and cost $160 million. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Don't forget to subscribe, and as always, thank you for watching.